All right. My name is Jason Truding, and this is a Brooklyn bound podcast of So Percussions. And this is my second time trying this intro with Iarla Lionáird because the Zoom gods took us off a second ago. But we are excited to chat for this podcast. This is getting ready for our first show of 2020 new season. September 17th is the show. And actually, Iarla, a bunch of your friends are playing that night. Beth is playing Emma O'Halloran's solo viola piece, which is beautiful. Priest slash Hyperprism, H Prism, who we both worked with at Princeton, and Ploric is playing. And then you're singing. It's going to be a magical night.
Exactly. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm delighted to be involved. Um, it's exciting. I mean, all of this is kind of new, like doing this kind of thing over these huge distances. Even we had a chat earlier. You were in the garden, and I thought that was surreal too.
Yeah.
We grew up when it was available. It was like magic. It still is like magic.
Yeah. Yeah.
To,
Well,
to,
actually, we were saying hanging out at that table was some of the times you came by my fire pit hang in Princeton. We got to in when times allow. Next
to do
time
it
you're in
again.
Princeton and we're allowed to be hanging out, we're gonna do that. We're gonna do that. But I was telling you, we have now been talking for 57 minutes before starting this podcast, so we have gotten to catch up in a good way.
Okay.
Um, but I was telling you, we haven't talked about these questions. There's 5 questions that I've been asking everybody, and I've been telling you that the first one is absurdly large, sprawling question. Um, I mentioned you'll be singing at Brooklyn Bound. So what was the path from for Iarla in terms of becoming the music maker that you are? From maybe first getting excited about music, or the kind of windy path that's gotten you to now.
Well, it has been a windy path, that's for sure. I started off singing when I was very small, and where I grew up was a place well known for singing in folk music circles in Ireland, certainly. Along the west of Ireland, there's all sorts of, like, if you were from Clare, people wouldn't be surprised that you were interested in fiddle music.
Mm,
They wouldn't even be surprised if you were a great fiddle player. They would
mm,
think it was in your blood.
mm,
And where I grew up, singing was sort of the thing, and particularly traditional singing, and more particularly again, a kind of traditional singing known as sean nos, which means old way,
mm,
which is usually in Irish, though not always. And it has sort of, as I often say to my own daughters, it has little squiggly things in it,
mm,
a lot of melismata, and it doesn't sound um, Western in that sense.
mm,
It has an unusual texture and feel, probably because it's in a different language, but it has its own aesthetic. So I started off doing that as a very small kid, and it,
Like what age are we talking?
oh, I definitely was very small. I mean, I have a strange memory of the first day I went to school, like primary school.
Mm,
What would you call it? I was 5,
yeah.
and I remember the teacher hoisting me up on the desk. I was terrified, and she said, "Sing."
Really?
So she knew my mom,
Uh,
and Mrs. Maxrini was her name, Mrs. Mac for short,
yeah.
and she knew that I was singing, and then I think I was recorded for radio when I was 8. I, I didn't feel precocious. When
Mm,
you give people the dates of these things, it makes it sound like I was really precocious. I was certainly not. I was really shy, and quite a bit of an introvert actually, which may have played into the type of singing that I was doing, because it is a sort of an introverted style of singing
mm,
in many respects. So then I just kept doing that, and I joined a local folk choir, and I was recorded on an LP by the time I was, I guess, 13 or 14. And I, really always wanted to be able to use my heritage of music to infiltrate somehow, or have a discussion with the contemporary world.
mm,
Because I did grow up in a bubble, but I didn't grow up in a entirely sealed bubble. I was listening to American music, British music, all kinds of music. I mean, when I was a young kid, I was very influenced by um, what was going on in the 70s and 80s in pop, and everything from David Bowie to David Byrne to the Eagles. It wouldn't be
mm.
cool to say some of this, Bob Dylan. Paul Simon. Joni Mitchell was a huge influence on me. And so I was always wanting to find out, could I integrate, not even as crudely as that, but would there be a way of finding an aperture in the world of music for what I was given, which is very old form of singing, which is centuries old. And so I suppose in a sense that people perceive that that's been my mission, but it's been more of a, as you know, as a professional musician, these paths are very curvy and windy and wiggly.
Yeah, I think I realized that more and more how, I mean, just thinking about my own path, but talking to other people, I mean, nobody has some sense of like, when I was 5, I thought I was going to do this. And, but, I mean, that's like so silly. But so when you're going back to the old way idea, like, how were you learning that music? What was the process of learning? Did you say
It's
it's
a very
Shanos?
good question. Very good question. Now, most of the repertoire that is still sung even in that style is 19th century. Some of it 18th century. Very little before that, because there was no music notation to speak of in our forms of music before the late 1700s. It was folk-based oral transmission mechanism. So you just don't find notation before these collections were finally made in the late 1700s. So how did I learn it? Well, I had, in the area there were teachers. I grew up in a sort of a linguistic bubble. The Irish language has retreated quite a lot in Ireland. There might only be like 50,000 native speakers left.
And is Gaelic? Is that another word for the Irish?
Yeah, exactly. So they're tiny pockets in the West, and but they're proud, and they work very hard at teaching you and handing on the tradition. So in school, I learned a lot of the songs. I had singing teachers in the parish who themselves were carriers of the tradition. And my mother and father were very invested in music and in the language. So it was all of my family sang, all my brothers and sisters, and I have many. Shock horror to those of you who will listen to what I have to say next. I have 9 brothers and 2 sisters.
Yes. Amazing.
Like, that is like, what?
And they all sing.
Everybody virtually sings. Yeah, it must be quite a sound if we could sing together.
You should.
But I suppose maybe I was lucky, maybe I wasn't, but I became more into developing it than the others. I mean, you mentioned there a moment ago, like, of knowing whether you have a path or not. It isn't that I knew I had a path. It feels more like the path keeps just pulling you back. Because, I've taught in school, in university. I've done all sorts of different things. I've worked as a film producer, as a television presenter, as a radio documentary maker. I still do that. I've done many series of podcasts, but the singing, it just pulls you back. I think most musicians kind of feel that, don't they?
Yeah, I feel that. I mean, I was interested when you said, I didn't know what. Am I saying it right? Shanos?
Yes, in fact, it's very funny because a guy interviewed me long ago on radio in America. This is true, by the way. And I'm sorry. I'm gonna have
to try again to get Iarla later. You can't get him now. He's talking about the old way.
Sorry, man. Pretty bad.
No, I love it.
I remember I did an interview for radio in America years ago. I can't remember which radio station. And the guy said to me, "I believe you know a gentleman called Sean Knows." I just don't know whether he was joking or not.
Wow.
He kept a straight face. But Shan, what did you ask about it again?
Well, first I wanted to just make sure I was saying it right. But when you said it translated to old way, I found that really interesting because I think I mean, it makes perfect sense. But for me, learning about you and your music, and what you do, I learned through all the new things you're doing, right? Like through working with mutual friends, Dan Truman, or I think first hearing you sing on Donica Dennehy's big piece with Crash, but then knowing your band, the Gloaming, and being on similar record labels sometimes, like knowing the kind of newer framing of the vibe. And I really love is that, would that be uncommon for singers in that style to be open to new ways of working, or is that something built into the tradition?
It's not built into the tradition at all, actually. But so my answer to that is a complicated one. It is no longer uncommon, but when I started out, it was entirely uncommon. You did have folk singing in Ireland. Yes, you absolutely had extraordinary bands like Planxty and the Bothy Band, and they were singing almost invariably in English with folk inflections. But the sean-nós was kind of kept in a sort of a hermetically sealed vessel, and nobody wanted to touch it or interfere with it or kind of bring the impurity of the outside world to bear. Um, I was discouraged quite a lot by that narrative as a young man, and it was challenging to have the courage to persevere. But I'm delighted to say that it's more common now to see practitioners of sean-nós have a go at different things, whether it be the orchestral setting or various versions of contemporary folk. And I suppose as well, contemporary folk itself today is much more flexible entity. And also, I mean, I think contemporary classical is a very flexible entity. I mean, people like yourself and Dan Truman and Donica and all of the many composers I've met in Princeton, there's an extraordinary, for me, it feels like an extraordinary openness of mind. Because when I was growing up, much and all as it's vaunted and beautiful to be involved in a tradition, there is the side to a tradition that can be stultifying on individual creativity, especially when you're seen as a flag carrier for that tradition, and there are there are sets of expectations that are built into that role that you didn't choose for yourself.
So, and you would be seen that way by many or some, in terms of like, this tradition, so you are therefore carrying it on.
I suppose I would be. I'd probably be seen by some as a flag burner.
Right. You're both.
Because I certainly, in some aspects of my life, I certainly went out of my way to really destroy that notion of an inherited credibility, because I'm not comfortable with it. I adore the traditional singing, and you've heard my work, and I do love to deploy it, and the skills that and the kind of approach and that aesthetic into other musical worlds. I've also sung things that had nothing to do with sean-nós, but for the most part, I feel very comfortable deploying the skill set, the kind of I suppose it's almost like a haptic thing, the sense of touch that language and style gives you.
Well, I think we're dwelling on this first question way too long, but I'm just way too interested, and it's bringing me back this memory of me and Beth being we were up in Vermont having dinner with some friends, really small, beautiful cottage. A friend of ours made a lovely meal, one of these like memorable nights, and we, you had come up because I think they had just seen that movie, whichever the Hollywood blockbuster.
The movie, that movie, yeah, which is the same name as your event.
It is Brooklyn, right? Is that the name of it? Yeah. But so they and said, oh, actually, we know this, and we had put on some of your other work, and I remember these are friends that we feel comfortable. We sat and just listened in silence to one of Beth's favorite pieces of yours. But my experience in that moment was, I feel like I'm that guy that grew up with pop music and never knew the words. I was listening to everything else. So when you're singing in Irish and I have no idea what you're saying, it becomes about everything else. And there's so many other details that are so moving. And this particular piece there was a loop. It was definitely like a phrase that kept going. and to see what you did with it each time and to get into the details of it became so powerful, having no relation to the context of the vocabulary, you know. And there was just something about it that I loved like that. It's almost the way I listen to all song in English too, but there was a permission, having no idea what you were saying, to get into everything else about it, you know.
Yeah,
Does that resonate with you at all?
it's a curious thing, you know, because well, first of all, thank you. It's amazing, you know, when you hear people respond to your work, and I think all of us musicians, you know, we get a strange kind of buzz from that because we don't understand it either, you know.
Mm.
I haven't a clue what's happening to me when I'm performing, and I don't know what's happening to anybody else. It's quite a strange, nebulous sort of exchange. But I think a lot of the time in my work, as you pointed out, nobody really understands in real time what I'm saying. And so there has to be perhaps, and actually you put it very well in reference to your own way of listening to music, there has to be a new kind of listening going on, where the voice is a sort of a carrier wave of a certain musical language, but also a carrier wave of emotions. And now, I mean, it could be that I'm doing it all wrong. I have, you know, long ago I did it. One of the first concerts I did in my life was in Dublin when I was 16. You know, my first public concert, right? And it was in a wonderful venue called Slattery's in Capel Street, a famous folk music venue. And I remember singing, and the guy who asked me to sing was very disappointed with my performance, very, very disappointed. And the audience were very delighted. He was very disappointed. And he said, you're really too emotional when you sing. You know, this is not what I was expecting. And he went on and on about that. And anyway, I thought about that afterwards, and I just thought, maybe I'm trying. I don't know. Maybe I'm emoting more than other people. Maybe I'm not. You know, there's a certain aesthetic in channel sometimes where you under emote, you know, which I think is probably very Catholic. Not trying to offend any Catholics. I was raised as one myself, but I think it's a very Catholic sort of attitude of holding it in and not displaying any emotion. This would be like crazy thing to do in most other music forms, you know?
Yeah.
What? You're singing and you're afraid of emotion? So I think very early on, I felt really captivated by the emotional changes that happen to you when you're singing. Something emotional really happens inside. And I've always wanted to explore that area and reveal that to myself when I'm singing. It's like, it feels like it's the thing I should be doing. Kind of thing. Sorry, my answers are very long. I apologize.
No. My questions are actually probably longer. But I mean, there's so many cool projects you have to talk about. But let's think about, or let's get to the songs you're presenting on Brooklyn Bound. So if I've seen right, I think you have three tunes. Is that right? 3 songs?
I have. I'm going to do 3 songs. The one of them actually is the song that I did in Brooklyn, Cossin Two Gone, and that's a beautiful story. It's kind of, you know, a lot of the songs from the Irish tradition, as I mentioned earlier, they're quite old, but they have an innocence, you know, the sort of in a sense it's like reading maybe literature from that period. There's just an innocence, you know. People hold back. There's no vulgarity. There's no big expose. There's a playfulness to the exchange between the sexes, between humans, and that song is very typical of that because it's a love song, but it's about the joy of love, but it's also about the tragic disappointment of a love that doesn't happen, and the wordplay in it is very, very clever, and you know, I won't go on about that, but
and what's the translated title?
Well, Cossin kind of means the winding of the hay rope, and a hay rope was a thing that was used a lot in agrarian society in Ireland, up until the 1950s, where you made a rope out of hay, literally, by winding it around, and you could make seats for chairs, you could make all kinds of things with that, baskets for carrying fuel. And the woman of the house makes the young gentleman who comes to see his girlfriend wind the rope when he arrives, and the rope gets longer and longer, and then eventually he's outside the door, and she just slams the door on his face.
Nice one.
Then the next whatever 10 verses are him being really sad,
Yeah.
But the Irish have a passion for being sad,
Yeah.
despite the fact that they are, generally very, very funny people.
Yeah.
So that's Tossing Through Gone. I like it. It's a beautiful, simple. It's simple, but it's not. Most of the songs that I gravitated towards when I was very young were these very long lyric forms, very dense lyric forms, which had very complex, dramatic arcs of emotion and narrative. And I found that there's a lot of emotion in them, but these small ones contain more densely packed little molecules of emotion. Very interesting.
And with an old, I want to hear about these other songs for sure. But in this song, or the other ones, an Irish folk song, is there a composer or a writer associated with these songs, or are they
Well,
more anonymous?
The songs that I've chosen, I don't know the composers of them. That's the truth. It's a funny thing because somebody.
But does anybody? Is it, or it's just like an?
So.
Yeah.
I don't think so. No, but the truth is, right, that there could be. I can't be definitive about that. And in fact, just the other day, somebody texted me, a dear friend who lost his mom, and he said, "Can you find out for me who are the authors of this melody and that melody?" And so I went doing a bit of research, and I found that we can't find the authorship of some of the melodies because they predate the acquisition of transcription. But we can much more easily find, usually, the authorship of the words.
Right. That makes sense.
Because all of the singing of the 19th century largely was written, the words were written by pretty famous poets within their realm. They were the poetry of their day. All poetry in the 19th century in Ireland was sung. That's hard to understand, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I've gone to lots of poetry readings, but very few of them have poets singing.
Yeah.
Thank God, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I could think at your best, I mean, the kind of 60s beat poetry, something that has like a rhythm or a musicality, but I never think of song.
The only poet I ever heard sing, you won't believe this, but it's true, was Allen Ginsberg.
Oh, yeah, really?
He actually came to Dublin about 30 years ago, and I was at the concert. And he had a little hand harmonium, and he sang his poem. I thought, wow.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what. So in other words, the writers of the words in the Seanad tradition are super important. But I don't know the authorship of those particular songs. Like the first song I'm singing is Fáinne Galan Lay, and that's the first tin whistle melody most kids learn.
Oh, wow.
And so most people really hate it. Because it's the first tune they had to do when they couldn't do anything that would impress people.
So is it like in the U.S., if somebody learned a recorder, my kids in elementary school, you learn the recorder and you play "Mary Had a Little Lamb" or something like that.
Yeah, it'd be a similar kind of thing. And you know the way when you're really small and you can't instead of you're going.
Yeah, just overblowing. Yeah.
So mommy and daddy are listening and they're not impressed. So, but the song that I'm singing has a different version in the air, and it comes from. We're very lucky in Ireland that in the 18th century and the 19th century, there were many collectors, who took an interest in the. We're probably the most collected folk music in the world. At least that's what I've been told. And no, it came late, but they collected very thoroughly.
And collected what? Collected
tunes and songs. I mean,
like the written, like trend, like
yes,
books or wow.
No, they're absolutely. Some of these are famous events. The Belfast Harp Festival in the early 1790s, for example, where they collected the very last living bardic harpists. belonging to a caste that went back at least 1,500 years.
Wow.
And there was only 10 of them. 10.
Wow.
Only 10.
Wow.
And so they
10
transcribed
harpists.
Harpists,
Wow.
all male. One of them was, I think he was 80 something, or, oh no, he was 90 something.
Yeah.
Hempson.
Man, I find that, yeah, I find it so interesting just how these traditions are passed on. I've very different, but something feels similar. I've been like learning about Julius Eastman's music. I don't know if he was, in the early 70s at the same time as a lot of the minimalists that have really influenced what we do. And his music was never published at the time during his life. A lot of it was lost. A lot of it's being recreated off of recordings. Some of it exists in his hand. I mean, it's a repertoire that's being recreated from bits, which in some ways feels really exciting, actually. In other ways feels really, really sad that it's not kind of contained in the way that some other composers' work has been contained. But in some ways, it feels very living and exciting to be in that work. And
of course it does, because you're uncovering something. There are a couple of characters like that in that generation of American composers, aren't there, who haven't actually created that much music you can get your hands on.
Written work, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember as a student when Meredith Monk was first starting to catalog some of her work, because it was all things that she had taught by rote, that idea. I find those traditions that, and I guess I haven't realized you're very, very tapped into that tradition in a long way, to that idea of.
Because most people in most Irish traditional musicians are very invested in the older collections, which really started in the, as I said, in the late 1700s and accelerated, and really some of the collections actually happened in the United States, which is fascinating. There was a character in Chicago called Captain O'Neill.
Perfect.
Francis O'Neill. He was a policeman. But he took it upon himself to collect as much of the Irish music that was being played by Irish immigrants in Chicago.
Oh, wow.
In the early part of the century, and it's now regarded as like a treasure trove, because of course a lot of musicians went to America, and some of them, for example, made records there at the dawn of record making, and their records came back, and everybody started copying them. So anyway, you had all this
amazing
stuff.
Yeah, so that was two tunes. What's the third tune on your set?
Well, the third song then is an interesting song called Shularoon. And that song is what's known as a Macronic song. I've had many discussions with our colleague Dan Truman, our friend, about the idea of Macronic songs, which are songs in more than one language.
Oh.
They're thought to have come about in regions of Ireland where the Irish-speaking districts were bleeding into the English-speaking districts, and so you get wordplay between the communities. I witnessed that myself in the small area I grew up in. You could go to the pub and many people would be singing these Macronic songs, and there would be various degrees of understanding of the verses are in English and Irish, and sometimes they transliterate each other, but not always accurately, or with some risque nuance that might be lost in one or the other.
You mean like somewhere, it would mean something, and it would mean something in English and something different if you.
It means something more in Irish, maybe.
Yeah. But and these would, like, in the same verse, you would go back and forth between.
Sometimes in the same verse. That's
or
correct.
Verse to verse.
But usually verse to verse. But there are some beautiful ones that actually it happens inside the verse. Now imagine how complicated they were to compose. Some of them are so beautifully composed. But this one is a song of love as well. And actually, I learned this from the singing of my great aunt. She was a very interesting woman, and your listeners could check her out easily. She was recorded by Alan Lomax. Her name is Elizabeth Clonen. And I think I told Beth about Elizabeth Clonen years ago, and I'm always talking about her in Princeton. But she is a beautiful singer from West Cork, my mother's aunt. And she was recorded by a number of people, the BBC, Alan Lomax for the Smithsonian. And that's the third song I'm singing is her version of Shularoon.
Oh, wow. And these you'll be singing your solo, but did I hear you say you're using a harmonium, or are you singing over a?
not just that. I asked a
No.
friend of mine to accompany me on
Oh, I
this.
did see that in your note.
Yeah. Well, I was going
Cool.
to do it on harmonium first, but then well, what I thought was this. I do most of my performances in Ireland in folk music with this gentleman. Or I do many of them with this guy, Steve Cooney. He's an amazing person. I would ask your listeners to check out his site, Steve Cooney. He's even invented, he has a doctorate in music. He's invented a new form of notation, actually,
Oh, wow.
temporal and tonal, based on concentric circles.
Wow.
I know you'd be interested in that.
Yeah.
He's from Australia originally, so he's accompanying me on guitar, various guitars, and also I'm using the little Shruti drone machine.
Yeah.
He's a wonderful colleague of mine.
Awesome.
Just later this week now we're going to go to the West to do one of those concerts where there are very few people. Up to Clifton in Galway. But I've done many's the gig with Steve. He's an amazing, and he's brought out a new CD as well of ancient harp music on the guitar.
Oh, wow.
And it's stunning.
Amazing. I was about to just write down his name, but I think I have it in an email. I'm gonna need to check out Steve's work. Very cool of him to join you.
Yeah, it's very. He was very generous with his time, and I'm so thrilled that he.
Yeah, very cool. I have a couple other questions to end with, but I'm realizing I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but I think you may be jumping in on one of the tunes that of mine that So's doing in our last set.
That's right. I will be.
That I have to say, we were talking before I pressed record on just this moment of figuring out how to collaborate remotely and such. And I remember when I was writing these tunes, feeling like I'd had a great experience with Sam Amadon in Berlin and Sharonova in Berlin, where they sang some of their work over my songs. And I thought, oh man, I wonder what Iarla would do. And you came back with this amazing. It's almost ruined it for me. It's hard to play the song without it. We've played it instrumentally some, which I believe it works just instrumentally. But with your tune over the top, it's just so beautiful.
Well, it was a very interesting exercise for me. I was thinking about it today before we connected. I can't figure it out myself. It lives inside somewhere between fiction and dream and fact. I don't know quite what it's about. Augustus Queenlum is the phrase that's repeated, which there's two phrases repeated. Augustus Queenlum, which means and I remember, and I remember, and I remember, and I remember. And then Fe Yassa Fos is the other one, which means still under the spell, still under the spell, still under the spell.
And you sing that one, right? You speak, I will remember, and you sing this. That's really cool.
Fe Yassa Fos. Or things like that.
Yeah, so nice.
I remember my daughter asked me one time, Dad, what's the basis of your career? And I said, this. Really disappointed that it could be nailed down to one little thing that you can do.
A squiggle.
A little squiggle, yeah. So Fegasaphos, I've no idea where that idea came from, but that's what I love about responding to beautiful music like you sent me, is that, I don't really want to be in charge of my response. As songwriters and as composers and performers, isn't it amazing that a lot of what happens is, well, I think of what Paul Muldoon told me more than once, that it's what he calls negative capability, which is the sort of concept given to us by John Keats, the poet, which is that your capability is not your capability. It comes from somewhere else. We don't know what it is. Either our brains are some sort of self-generating engine, or maybe we can imagine that we're able to connect to other things. But it happens to me anyway when I'm really inspired by other music, and that's what happened there. Those moments are the moments I treasure.
Yeah, it's very cool. I know what you mean about I love being a composer that comes up with the ideas, but being in a different place where you're responding to somebody else's ideas and a freedom to like throw things out and almost give, I feel like it's a giving gesture. I'm going to give you these ideas to work with however you want. It's an awesome other frame of mind. It feels more like, I really love that style of collaborating, and something about this, well, maybe this leads us to our next question. Something about this moment of remoteness, I've really enjoyed doing that with other musicians. And we are so grateful that you're jumping in to do that with us right now. But I've been asking everybody, I mean, this is like, this is an intense time, Iarla. Like, I feel like, you were mentioning your daughter. Like, when I speak to my daughters, I feel like so often I have some frame of reference for something they'd be going through. And when I tell them that, like, I have never been through this moment, this idea of quarantine and COVID, and nobody in our lives have. And then in the States, you mix that with this very powerful Black Lives Matter moment that, in so many ways, I think is connected to, it's a feeling of eruption and disgust, and some of it, I think, coming from this pent up quarantine, in a good way, but also in a really intense way. And then we were talking about politics a little bit. I haven't even really asked that of folks, but just in this intense moment, how do you think of being an artist in this moment, or what has your practice been in this moment in relationship to any of this?
Well, I a couple of things, I suppose. I have found, I think, like yourself too, that I've been, I'm normally fairly passive on social media, but I've been doing a little bit more, just connecting more and saying I like a bit more.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been making my artist friends, trying to make them feel more aware of the fact that I'm there and that I'm saying hi. As with your own country, I mean, our performance life here in Ireland has largely switched off, and it's funny because I've never been quite as busy in studio, but it's as though I had prophesied it to myself. I started working on a project before Christmas where I was writing in response to composers' works without actually ever being in the same room. And I'm still working on that. It's been very interesting. But I think that you're right. This COVID scenario, I think, has created a sort of an unusual vacuum chamber where thinking is different, where feeling is different, where connecting is different, where creating is different. And although it's scary and it's, and I don't want to dwell on your country because I don't think it's fair for me to be talking about another country.
I think it's okay. I think we deserve.
I just want your American friends to know that I try and stay very aware of what's happening in America, out of a desire to be helpful, out of a desire to understand and support. And I think the Black Lives Matter is, I think it's the most important thing to ever happen in your history. It needs to happen in all our histories. We're not immune here in Ireland to those darknesses, those closed-minded attitudes. And I think a lot of people are very supportive quietly about what's going on in your country. I really feel that very strongly. We have our own issues here, believe me. We used to be called the island of saints and scholars. We're definitely not saints, Most of our saints, they dwell in the past. But it is an interesting space. I think it's a space of many possibles, actually. This new, when I arrived home in Ireland on the 1st of March, I had no idea when I was leaving New York that there were so many serious cases of COVID in New York on that date. None of us knew. You didn't know either. No, I think some people knew, but they weren't telling us. We won't go there.
It's true. I think we have found that out. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
No,
had
but
the same
very
thing.
recently.
We were in Paris. Our last show was in Paris, March 8th or something. And that feeling of, it's so weird to think about right now. It feels like, how were we overseas on March 8th? That makes no sense,
Oh,
but
that's interesting, isn't it?
everything was moving so strangely. And yeah.
I mean, it's a challenge for all of us. It would be nice to think that these new ways of working that we're in some ways forced into by this new scenario would in some ways grow legs,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
that would increase our adaptability and increase our awareness and increase our reachability.
Mm. I think
And
that is a positive way to look at the
I think so.
moment, which I think I mean, yeah, I find myself trying to find the energy to have an optimism of and an internal optimism of do you know doing the work to learn more. It feels like that's a moment for a lot of people, and that's definitely a moment for me right now of reading more and talking more and about what the real issues are inside Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, the movement's been around for so long, actually, for years, but it feels like it has a different consciousness right now for white people, so that part feels positive.
No, I think it does. I think us white people really, 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 really need to pursue relentlessly new thinking. Because really it is as profound as having to rewire our brains, our culture, our structure of living. It's a profound question.
Yep.
I'm sorry if I'm being so.
No, it's true. It's hitting home.
But it is,
Yeah.
I myself have so much learning to do. And I think your average Irish person needs to step up, and I'm one of them.
Just an average Irish person. You're my average Irish friend. I love it. The last question of Slated gets us into gets us slightly off of the heavy but related in some ways. I feel like I've been asking this question even before COVID, just of a kind of more fun or poignant, memorable concert experience. And I feel like right now, since concerts feel so foreign and in the past, it almost feels, I've commented to so many folks I've been talking to that, sometimes we think of the silly, terrible concert. Yeah, like when something went drastically wrong, on stage. Those are these kind of moments for us. But also the really wonderful, poignant or transcendent moments that we've had on stage. Those memories feel powerful right now. Like, what's your? I guess you shared your. You were 5 years old when you were hoisted onto a desk in your kindergarten classroom to sing for the class.
That's terrifying. That's not a happy memory.
That's not a happy memory. What's another one?
Well, I mean, I've had so many great opportunities in music. I think one of the great things that happened to me in not so long ago. I told Dan this story actually before. I was in a venue in Cork City called the Triskel Arts Centre. I was there with my friend Cleek Shry and Ivan Goff. We were going out as a trio that time called Ghost Trio. And I remember Cleek saying to me at the interval, "Hey buddy, words to the effect," and I don't want to take them off, but I will anyway. "Hey buddy, you don't need to be thanking them all the time."
Thanking the audience?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I said, "Was I?" And he says, "Yeah, chill, And I said, and then I thought, I know I am doing it. And he said, "Why?" "Because usually there's nobody there."
I love that.
At some point, relatively recently, more people started showing up. Probably had something to do with the gloaming, and that was a wonderful thing.
Well, so when was it this show with Cleek and the trio show? When was this?
It was actually kind of a little bit after the gloaming started.
And so when did the gloaming start?
About 11 years ago. So this was
okay.
This was about, maybe 8 years ago.
Nice,
and
okay.
I suppose I was just surprised, I had no expectation. I've always seen my music as somewhat obscure. So I'll never forget that, because it made me realize that I just felt lucky, I felt lucky that I have an audience and I value them, and I became oddly, for the first time, kind of aware of them. That sounds strange. You think you'd be aware of them all the time. But in Shano's singing, a lot of the time, it's so introverted. You almost are not there,
I love that,
So
because I feel like maybe last time I was in Dublin, I remember, we played at the New Music Festival, I forget what, New Music Dublin or something. And I just remember all around the concert hall were just like, big gloaming posters that were, like 5 shows added, like sold out national. Like that's the vibe. But I think that's so healthy. I mean, it's healthy for me, but for any musician listening, I mean, you can be playing for 3 people or 3,000 people. I mean, it's like a appreciation of audience is a good thing.
Absolutely. And I mean, the new vogue now since COVID. I mean, I've done a few concerts where there's nobody and it's just cameras.
Yeah.
And that has been quite. I don't want to use the word strange, because I didn't actually feel strange. It just felt new.
Yeah.
It just felt different.
Yeah.
But I think that's been the greatest thing for me musically, is to get an impression of how the audience are feeling, because that enlarges the conversation I have with myself about what is it I'm trying to do. Because a lot of the time I have no idea what I'm doing.
I don't believe you, first of all, but this show, this Brooklyn Bound show, I don't know. So it's 7:00 on September 17th, which I don't know. What are we talking about? Midnight, 1 p.m. What are we talking about for you?
I'm not very good at that.
Yeah. How many hours? What time is it for you right now?
It's now 5:42.
Okay, good. So it's 5 hours different. So, if you have a late cup of coffee and you're still up at midnight, one of the weird things about these shows has been that the togetherness comes from people chiming in on the chat and kind of in real time having these experiences with the music together. And I wasn't sure I was going to be into that, first of all, as a middle-aged, somewhat old school guy, apparently. And I've been really into it, this kind of very different communal aspect of experiencing music together. So, if you're up, and everybody else who definitely in the States should be around 7 p.m. Eastern time, it's really nice to get together either on Facebook or YouTube and kind of take in these sets. So, Iarla, I think you have this, I forget, the second or third set of the night. I know Beth's going to start the show with Emma's piece, and Priest has his set down, and then we're all gonna join together.
We'll be doing it from this very room, actually, where I'm sitting now.
We'll bring you in. Beth wants to say hi, Iarla, before we.
Hi, Beth. How are you? Lovely to see you.
He's saying hi.
When you come back to Ireland, Beth, I'm gonna rent you more and more of a crowd. You won't believe it.
He says when you come back to Ireland, it's gonna be good. When you finally get back, we were talking about your canceled tour to Ireland, Damsel's canceled tour. Well, I am very pumped about the 17th, and in true Irish style, Iarla, we talked longer than I was expecting, and I loved every second of it. I miss being able to connect in person, and I'm hopeful that you'll be back in Princeton, like you said, sometime in the future, and I'll definitely make it out to Ireland in the future. But the idea that we can do a little bit of collaborating remotely is a joyful feeling.
I really am. I'm delighted to be asked, and I'm delighted for us to connect again, and I hope we connect more and more.
Absolutely. Well, everybody tune in. If you haven't heard Iarla sing, you are up for a treat. He goes, a lot. as he said. So
That's exactly it. That's all it is.
I don't want to give it all away, but there's gonna be some.
My secret is revealed.
It's too good. All right, man. Thanks for taking the time to chat, Iarla. All right,
Bye.
I'll see you soon. Bye.